The lights in the billionaire's penthouse were dim when the pain struck again, a sharp electric sting that shot from the back of Eleanor Davenport's head to behind her eyes. The 74-year-old mother of one of the richest men in the city pressed trembling fingers to her scalp and whispered into the empty room, "Not again. Please, not again." Across the skyline, in a glass office where night looked like numbers, her son Michael Davenport stared at glowing spreadsheets, convincing himself that paying for the best doctors on the planet meant he was taking care of everything. Widowed, locked inside a grief he never allowed to breathe, he had learned to solve problems with money, not presents. His mother's complaints about needles in my head sounded, to him, like one more thing he could throw resources at and forget. Eleanor was not a woman who dramatized anything. For most of her life she had carried family, bills, and disappointments on the same small shoulders without ever raising her voice. Now, however, her world had shrunk to the four walls of that immaculate guest suite, and the invisible pain drilling from her scalp down to her bones. It didn't feel like age. It felt wrong, pointed, intentional, like something foreign living under her skin. The doctors had run test after test, scans, blood work, long names that Michael repeated like a shield. "They say it's just stress, Mom. Maybe a little vertigo. You're not 20 anymore." He had smiled in that tired, distant way and promised to schedule another specialist, then left before she could find the courage to say, "I'm scared." The only thing that stayed after his visits was expensive cologne and the echo of unsaid words. By mid-morning, the penthouse was already awake. The housekeeper adjusted cushions no one used. The private chef prepared meals Eleanor could hardly swallow. The television murmured in the background, not for entertainment but to keep the silence from swallowing her. On the coffee table lay a neat row of pill bottles, each with a label and a promise that had never been fulfilled. It was usually around that time that Vanessa arrived. Vanessa Hart, Michael's fiancée, moved through the apartment like she owned the air. Tall, elegant, flawless. She had the kind of beauty that photographs loved and souls feared. Her high heels clicked softly on the marble, and every sound in the room seemed to bow when she entered. "Good morning, Eleanor," she would sing, placing a practiced kiss on the old woman's cheek. "How is that little headache today?" Eleanor always tried to answer with dignity. "It's fine, dear. Just a bit uncomfortable." The truth was that the pain was getting worse, especially after Vanessa began insisting on touching up her hair before every dinner, every visit, every charity photo. "We can't have the mother of Michael Davenport looking neglected, can we?" she would joke, standing behind the armchair, fingers sliding into Eleanor's white hair. Those were the moments when the pain changed. It became smaller and sharper, localized, as if each twist of hair drove a needle deeper. Every time Vanessa pushed a pin into place, Eleanor felt something being driven straight into her skull. But when she reached back later, her fingers found nothing, only warm skin and the ghost of Vanessa's perfume. She told herself it was vanity to complain, paranoia to suspect. Michael had already buried one woman he loved. Eleanor refused to be the reason he questioned the second. So she smiled, endured, and repeated the same phrase to herself. It must be age. It must be age. Michael, meanwhile, watched his life like a balance sheet. Widowed for 7 years, still haunted by the image of his late wife in a hospital bed. He had decided that feelings were a liability. Contracts and investments obeyed rules. People didn't. When Vanessa appeared, efficient, dazzling, fluent in philanthropic circles, he believed he had finally found someone who would manage the chaos he didn't want to feel. "Your mother is forgetting things," Vanessa murmured to him once, swirling wine in a crystal glass. She repeats herself. "Yesterday she told me the same story twice and didn't even notice." Michael sighed, tired. "She's getting older, Ness. That's normal." "I know," she replied, resting a manicured hand on his arm. "But you need to be prepared. One day she might not even recognize you." From then on, every complaint Eleanor made seemed, in his eyes, like evidence that her mind was slipping. It was easier to believe she was confused than to imagine something truly wrong. It was easier to send flowers than to sit on the edge of her bed and listen while she described pain no exam could see. Weeks later, when the building management announced a new addition to the cleaning staff, no one really cared. The penthouse had seen dozens of employees come and go, faces blurred by uniforms and routine. But that Monday morning, when the service elevator opened and a young woman stepped out clutching a worn backpack, Something quiet shifted in that house. Her name was Grace Miller. Grace was not used to marble floors or panoramic windows. She was used to narrow hallways, cracked tiles, and bus seats that shook with every turn. She had grown up caring for a grandmother who never had money for fancy hospitals, but always had time to teach her to pay attention. "People's pain lives in the details, Gracie," her grandmother would say. "If you don't look closely, you'll miss it." As she followed the head housekeeper into the penthouse, Grace felt her chest tighten. Everything seemed too white, too organized, too quiet. She kept her eyes low, afraid of knocking something over just by existing, and murmured her good mornings in a voice that almost disappeared beneath the high ceilings. "Grace, you'll start in the living room," the housekeeper instructed. "Dust the shelves, wipe the glass, and don't bother Mrs. Davenport unless she calls you. Understood?" Grace nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am. I won't disturb anyone." But the house disturbed her, not because of the wealth, but because of the way the air felt heavy, like a place where words were swallowed instead of spoken. From the doorway of the living room, she saw Eleanor sitting by the window, hands folded in her lap, eyes half closed. The older woman winced, just barely, and brought her fingers to the side of her head as if touched by an invisible blade. Grace's heart squeezed. That gesture was familiar. Her grandmother had done the same thing, nights before a stroke that almost took her life. Back then, no one believed the old woman's complaints either. "It's just age," they said. "She wants attention." Grace had been the only one to sit next to her and truly listen, the only one to notice the bruises forming where a cheap hair clip dug into her skin. Trying not to stare, Grace began dusting the shelves, moving slowly so she wouldn't miss a single corner. In the reflection of a framed photograph, she saw Michael smiling for the camera, Vanessa at his side, and Eleanor a step behind, slightly out of focus, like a memory already fading from her own family portrait. The kitchen door swung open. Vanessa entered with a leather handbag in one hand and a phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, Michael. I checked on her," she said, pacing without even noticing Grace. "She's the same. Headaches, confusion, a little paranoia. I think it's time we consider full-time care, somewhere more specialized." Grace froze, dust cloth in midair. "She's here," Vanessa continued, lowering her voice but not enough. "She doesn't even remember where she put her glasses. I know it's hard, but this is what love looks like sometimes. Making hard decisions. You focus on work. I'll handle your mother." The words, "handle your mother," hung in the air like a threat. Later that morning, when Vanessa went to Eleanor's room with a box of hair accessories, Grace happened to be passing by with a basket of folded towels. The door was half open. "Let's fix this hair a little, Eleanor," Vanessa said in a sweet tone that made Grace's skin crawl. "We can't let the neighbors think Michael doesn't take care of you." Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders curved, eyes tired. "I don't know if I can, dear. My head, it's just because you stay thinking too much," Vanessa cut in, standing behind her and parting the white hair with quick, practiced motions. "Relax. I'll make you look beautiful." The first pin slid in with a soft click. Eleanor flinched, then swallowed the cry rising in her throat. Grace forced herself to keep walking, but the image stayed stuck in her mind like a splinter. A few minutes later, as she placed the towels in a cabinet down the hallway, she heard a soft, stifled sound coming from the room, half sigh, half whimper. Every instinct in her begged her to go back and check, but she reminded herself, "You're just the cleaning lady. You have no right to interfere." Near lunchtime, Grace returned to the living room with a spray bottle and a clean cloth. Eleanor had been settled into an armchair by the window, a light blanket over her legs. Her eyes were closed, but her fingers kept drifting toward the back of her head, pressing, then retreating, as if afraid of what they might find. "Excuse me, Mrs. Davenport," Grace said softly, standing at a respectful distance. "Would you like me to close the curtains? The sun is very strong today." Eleanor opened her eyes slowly. There was a gentleness there that made Grace instantly less afraid. "No, darling. Leave them open. I like to remember that the city is still moving, even when I feel stuck." She tried to smile, then winced again, her hand flying to the nape of her neck. This time she couldn't hide it. Grace hesitated, then gathered all the courage she had learned from a lifetime of watching pain ignored. "Forgive me for asking, ma'am, but is your head hurting a lot today?" Eleanor blinked, surprised by the sincerity in that simple question. No white coat, no clipboard, no rush. just a pair of worried eyes in a simple uniform. Yes, she admitted, voice breaking. It feels like something is stabbing me from the inside, and no one believes me anymore. The honesty of that confession hit Grace harder than any shouted order ever had. She took a small step closer. I believe you, she said quietly. I grew up taking care of my grandmother. Sometimes what hurts is something small that nobody sees, but it doesn't mean it isn't there. If you allow me, later, when things are calmer, I could take a careful look. I promise I'll be very gentle. For the first time in weeks, Eleanor felt seen. A single tear escaped the corner of her eye, not only from the pain in her head, but from the relief of being taken seriously. You remind me of an old friend, she murmured. Yes, my dear. You can look. I would be grateful. That promise hung between them for the rest of the morning like a fragile bridge no one else could see. After lunch, Vanessa left, claiming an unavoidable meeting. If she starts talking nonsense, call me, she told the housekeeper. The last thing Michael needs is to come home to one of her episodes. Before stepping into the elevator, she leaned over Eleanor one last time, fingers pressing a little too long into the back of the old woman's head. Eleanor bit her lip until she tasted blood. When the elevator doors closed behind Vanessa, a different kind of silence settled over the penthouse. For the first time that day, the house felt as if it truly belonged to Eleanor again. Grace finished wiping the coffee table, then turned toward her with a decision already made inside her chest. Mrs. Davenport, she murmured as she approached. If you're still willing, I can take that look now. Eleanor exhaled as if she had been holding her breath since dawn. Let's do it before I lose the courage, she answered. Grace moved the armchair closer to the window so the afternoon light fell directly on the older woman's silver hair. Tell me the moment it hurts, okay? Grace said, rolling up her sleeves. Her hands trembled not because she didn't know what to do, but because she knew exactly what it would mean if she found something there. She placed a towel gently over Eleanor's shoulders, then began to separate the strands of hair with the utmost care. As she parted the locks row by row, Grace saw tiny bumps interrupting the smoothness of the scalp. At first she thought they might be old scars, but when she lightly traced one with the tip of her finger, Eleanor gasped. I'm sorry, Grace whispered. Did I hurt you? No more than it's already been hurting, Eleanor replied through clenched teeth. Keep going. I'd rather know. Grace leaned in closer, using the screen of her phone as a small flashlight. There, beneath a thin layer of skin, something reflected the light for a fraction of a second. So small anyone in a hurry would have missed it. She pressed beside the little bump and felt the unmistakable resistance of something solid, pointy, metallic. Mrs. Davenport, she murmured, voice almost inaudible. I think there is something here that shouldn't be. Eleanor's fingers gripped the armrests with surprising strength. What do you mean, something? I'm not a doctor, Grace said quickly, but it feels like a tiny piece of metal, like a pin, under the skin. A silence thick as velvet wrapped around them. In that silence lived every time Eleanor had been called confused. Every time her pain had been reduced to age or imagination. Fear rose in her chest, but so did a slow, righteous anger. Who would put something like that in my head? She whispered. Grace didn't answer. Images flashed through her mind. The box of hair accessories, the forced hairstyles, the way Vanessa's fingers lingered just a little too long. Rage flickered, but she swallowed it. Now was not the time to accuse. Now was the time to help. May I try to remove just one? She asked softly. If I manage, we'll know exactly what it is. If it hurts too much, I'll stop. I promise. Eleanor shut her eyes tight. Do it, she said. I'm tired of being afraid. Grace took a deep breath, wrapped the edge of the towel around her fingers for better grip, and positioned her thumb and index finger around the tiny bump, pressing gently to bring whatever was beneath the skin closer to the surface. Eleanor's breath hitched. Grace whispered, I'm here, you're not alone, as if her words could work like medicine. Then she felt it, the cold edge of metal sliding between her fingertips. She tightened her hold and began to pull millimeter by trembling millimeter, as a small, cruel piece of steel started to emerge from the millionaire's mother's head, and with it, the first thread of a truth that could tear that perfect house apart. The metal resisted at first, as if clinging to the place where it had been buried. Grace felt Eleanor's whole body tense beneath her hands. Almost there, she whispered, keeping her voice steady even though her own heartbeat was pounding loudly in her ears. When the object finally slipped free, Grace nearly lost her balance from how quickly it came out. A tiny metallic hairpin, no larger than a grain of rice, lay between her fingers, its tip sharpened, its base bent in a way that looked intentional, malicious. It was nothing like the decorative pins Vanessa often used. This one was industrial, utilitarian, and designed to be invisible. Grace stared at it, horrified. Eleanor's breathing came in uneven waves. Is that what I think it is?" she whispered. Afraid of the answer, Grace placed the pin on a clean tissue. "This shouldn't be inside anyone's skin," she said in a low voice. "It looks like it was pushed in, not by accident." The older woman trembled. Something inside her, something soft, polite, patient, cracked. She had endured weeks of agony believing she was losing her mind. Now in her lap lay proof that she had been hurt, not sick. Eleanor pressed a hand over her mouth as a sob escaped her. Not a cry of fear, a cry of justice born. Grace immediately knelt beside her. "You're safe now," she said. "You're not imagining anything." Eleanor shook her head. "Why would anyone do this to me? Why?" Grace hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Mrs. Davenport, has anyone been handling your hair often? Styling it? Adjusting it?" She already knew the answer, but she needed Eleanor to say it. A shadow crossed Eleanor's face. "Vanessa," she whispered. Grace felt the temperature in the room drop. "Your son's fiancé?" "She insists," Eleanor murmured. "She says I should look presentable. Says she's helping." Her voice broke. "But the pain always gets worse after she touches my hair." Grace swallowed hard. She wanted to protect this woman so fiercely it hurt. "Mrs. Davenport, may I check if there are more?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "Please do." Grace repositioned the armchair so the light hit the back of Eleanor's head more directly. She parted the hair inch by inch, her hands gentler than any doctor's. Soon her fingers found another raised bump, then another. Eleanor's shoulders sagged. "How many?" "At least 3 more," Grace said softly. "But I'll take them out one by one. We'll go slowly." She removed the second one with even more care, sliding it out as Eleanor's breath shook. The small clink of metal hitting the tissue felt like the sound of a courtroom verdict. The third came out with a thin line of blood. The fourth made Eleanor gasp, and Grace whispered soothing words while working delicately. When she finished, 4 sharp metal pins lay on the table, each identical, each hidden beneath the skin, placed precisely where Eleanor could not see or reach. Eleanor covered her face with trembling hands. "All this time, they said I was confused. They said I was old. They said it was in my mind." Grace sat beside her and wrapped a gentle arm around her shoulders. "You were never confused," she said, her voice steady with a quiet kind of fury. "Someone did this. Someone wanted you to be dismissed." Tears streamed down Eleanor's cheeks. "Michael will never believe me. He barely listens when I say I'm in pain." Grace shook her head softly. "Then we'll show him." She gathered the pins into a small glass bowl used for decorative stones on the coffee table. They clattered like broken secrets. "This is proof, and you are not alone." Eleanor reached out and squeezed Grace's hand with surprising strength. "My dear, you don't know what you've done for me." Grace smiled gently. "I just did what anyone should have." "No," Eleanor whispered. "Most people look away. You did not." For the first time in weeks, the old woman's eyes held not fear, but clarity. The fog of doubt was lifting, replaced by something steadier, dignity returning to its rightful place. A few minutes later, the elevator dinged. Grace froze. Eleanor stiffened. High heels clicked on the marble floor. Deliberate, polished, familiar. Vanessa was back. Grace instinctively placed herself beside Eleanor, not blocking her, but ready to shield her if needed. Eleanor wiped her tears just in time as the fiancé stepped into the living room. "There you are," Vanessa said, smiling sweetly, her eyes darting between them. "I forgot my scarf." Her gaze landed on the bowl on the table, the bowl full of metal pins. For a brief second, so brief an untrained eye would have missed it, Vanessa's smile tightened. Her pupils narrowed. Something cold slithered behind her expression, but Grace saw it, and Eleanor felt it. "Oh," Vanessa said, her voice light as air. "What's all this?" Grace spoke before Eleanor had to. Something Mrs. Davenport wanted removed from her scalp. Her tone was respectful, but her eyes were unflinching. Vanessa blinked. "Her scalp," she repeated in a tone of faint amusement. Eleanor, darling, you've been scratching again, haven't you? Eleanor's lips trembled, but Grace stepped forward half a pace, steady as a wall. These were under her skin, Grace said. I removed them. Vanessa stared at Grace with a sudden, surgical interest, as if studying a problem that had grown legs. Then she smiled. A slow, controlled, dangerous smile. Well, she said, slipping her scarf from the armchair. Isn't that thoughtful of you? Grace didn't break her gaze. Vanessa didn't either. And Eleanor sat in her chair, 4 tiny pieces of metal gleaming beside her, each one a fragment of truth that would change everything. Vanessa finally turned toward the elevator. Michael will want to hear about this, she said. I'll make sure he gets the right version. The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft metallic sigh. Grace looked at Eleanor. We'll tell him first. Eleanor nodded weakly. Before she twists it, Grace took her hand. I won't let her hurt you again. Outside, the city continued as if nothing had changed. Inside, the war had just begun. For a long moment after the elevator descended with Vanessa inside it, silence took over the penthouse. Not a peaceful silence, one thick with truth, fear, and the sudden awakening of a woman who had been muted by pain for far too long. Grace remained kneeling beside Eleanor's chair, her hand still gently wrapped around the older woman's. Are you all right? She asked softly. Eleanor nodded, though her breath trembled. I think, for the first time in weeks, I can breathe. She touched the back of her head gingerly, surprised by the absence of that stabbing pressure. I can't believe it. I truly thought I was dying. Grace shook her head. You were being hurt, and now we know it. The small bowl of pins sat between them like evidence in a courtroom. Eleanor stared at the sharp pieces, each one reflecting the afternoon light with a cruel glint. Why would she do this? Why? Her voice cracked. I have never harmed her. Grace swallowed, knowing the truth but searching for gentle words. Some people don't hurt because they're harmed. They hurt because they fear losing control. Her eyes softened. And you have something she wants. Your son's trust. His family name. Eleanor's breath hitched. Michael barely listens to me as it is. But you're still the only person he trusts without question, Grace said. Or the person he should trust? Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the truth settle like a weight on her chest. For years, she had worried that Michael's grief made him easy to manipulate. He had closed doors around his heart after losing his wife, and Vanessa had appeared at precisely the moment he was most vulnerable. She wants him, Eleanor whispered. All of him, and I'm in the way. Grace squeezed her hand. Not anymore. You're not alone in this. A soft rustle sounded from the hallway. Grace stood immediately, alert, but it was only the butler passing by on his way to the kitchen. He nodded respectfully and continued on, unaware that the house he served had just shifted beneath his feet. Eleanor wiped her eyes. Grace, when Michael comes home, I need you with me. He will listen if I'm not alone. I'll be right beside you, Grace said. But we must be careful, Eleanor added, fear returning to her gaze. Vanessa said she would tell him her version. That woman lies as easily as she breathes. Grace nodded. Then we tell him first. The plan settled between them like a pact. But then Eleanor hesitated. Grace, you should know something. Michael is complicated. He is not cruel. He is not blind. But he is afraid of feeling. Ever since his wife passed away, I've seen it, Grace said gently. He wears his grief like armor. Eleanor smiled sadly. Yes, and armor keeps things out, but it also keeps him locked in. She sighed, tired. Vanessa knows how to use that. Grace's jaw tightened. Then we'll use the truth. Before Eleanor could respond, the main door clicked open. Both women froze. Footsteps echoed through the entryway, firm, measured, unmistakably belonging to a man who filled any space he walked into. Michael Davenport was home. Grace rose to her feet, smoothing her uniform, her heart thudding. She wasn't afraid of him, but she knew the weight of his presence. Billionaire, widower, a man who lived by control and certainty, a man who might struggle to accept what she now held in a glass bowl. Michael entered the living room, pulling off his suit jacket as he did. His expression was tired, distracted, the burden of work still clinging to him. Mother, I heard from Vanessa that... He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes moved from Eleanor to Grace standing protectively beside her, and finally to the bowl of metal pins on the table. A muscle tightened in his jaw. What is that? Eleanor opened her mouth, but fear tangled her words. Grace stepped forward instead. "Mr. Davenport, sir, these were embedded in your mother's scalp." She spoke clearly, respectfully, with a steadiness she didn't entirely feel. "She's been in extreme pain for weeks. Today I removed these 4 pins from under her skin." Michael's expression did not change. If anything, it hardened. "Pins? Embedded? Are you saying—" "I'm saying," Eleanor whispered, finding her voice, "that someone put them there." Michael stared at her, but instead of shock, something like disbelief flickered across his features. "Mother, we've talked about this. The doctors said—" Grace inhaled sharply. "With all due respect, sir, the doctors didn't look closely enough." Michael turned sharply toward her. "And you did?" "Yes." Her voice did not waver. "Because I listened." A silence fell. Eleanor's lip trembled. "Michael, sweetheart, she's telling the truth." Michael looked down at the pins again. His mind spun with everything Vanessa had told him, that his mother was confused, imagining things, forgetting details. He forced himself to breathe. "How, exactly, did they get there?" Grace glanced at Eleanor, silently asking for permission. Eleanor nodded slowly, courage gathering in her eyes. Grace spoke carefully. "Your fiancé often styles your mother's hair, correct?" Michael froze. Grace continued, gently but firmly. "Every pin I removed was the type used to anchor tight hairstyles. But these were not decorative. They were sharp, forced in, hidden beneath the hairline where no one would see." Michael's face lost its color. "Are you accusing Vanessa of hurting my mother?" Grace did not back down. "I am telling you what I found." "I know what you said," Michael snapped, then immediately shut his eyes. Ashamed of his tone, he exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I'm sorry. I just need a moment." Eleanor leaned forward, her voice trembling. "Michael, she saved me. I wasn't imagining the pain. It was real, all of it." Michael opened his eyes slowly. For the first time, he truly looked at his mother, her pale face, her trembling hands, the small traces of dried blood at her hairline, and something inside him cracked. "Mom," his voice broke. "Why didn't you tell me it was this bad?" "I tried," she whispered, "but you were so tired, and Vanessa said I was just confused." Tears pooled in her eyes. "I didn't want to burden you." Michael swallowed hard, shame burning in his chest. "You could never burden me. You are my mother." Grace stepped back slightly, giving them space while staying close enough to protect Eleanor if needed. Michael picked up one of the pins with 2 fingers, examining it closely. His brows furrowed. "This isn't a normal pin. This is industrial, purpose-made." He looked up sharply. "Where's Vanessa?" "She left," Grace said calmly. "But she said she would make sure you get the right version of what happened." Michael's expression darkened like a storm cloud. That sentence struck him harder than anything else. He knew Vanessa twisted things. He knew she was ambitious. But this is attempted harm, he murmured. "To my mother." Grace's chest tightened with relief. He was finally seeing it. But then Michael turned toward her, his eyes heavy with something complicated. "Grace, thank you." The words were simple, but in his voice they carried weight. Gratitude, a shift. The first crack in a wall he hadn't let anyone touch for years. Grace lowered her eyes respectfully. "I only did what was right." Eleanor reached for her son's hand. "Michael, promise me something." "Anything," he said, kneeling beside her. "Promise that whatever happens next, you won't let her twist this. Not again." Michael squeezed her hand. "I promise." But even as he said the words, the elevator dinged again. All 3 turned toward the sound. Vanessa stepped out, her expression carefully composed, but her eyes sharp as needles. "Well," she said smoothly, "it seems we need to talk." Her gaze slid to Grace with cold precision. "And we need to do it now." Vanessa stood in the entryway with the poised confidence of someone who believed every room already belonged to her. Her red lips curved into a delicate smile, the kind that hid blades behind velvet. She held her phone in one hand, her scarf draped effortlessly across her arm, as if she had returned simply to pick up what she forgot. But her eyes, icy, calculating, revealed the truth. She had come back for control. Her heels clicked softly as she approached the living room. "Michael," she said sweetly, "I heard some worrying things. Grace here seems to be making your mother uncomfortable." Her gaze flicked to Grace, sharp and warning. "I thought it was best to return." Grace's pulse quickened. but she kept her chin steady. Eleanor froze, instinctively gripping her son's sleeve. Michael didn't stand. He remained kneeling beside his mother, one hand resting protectively over hers. That alone made Vanessa's smile tighten. "What did you tell him?" she asked lightly, directing the question at Eleanor, but clearly targeting Grace. Grace stepped forward quietly, her voice calm. "I told him the truth, that I removed 4 metal pins from Mrs. Davenport's scalp." Vanessa let out a small laugh, polished and airy. "Metal pins? Embedded? Really, Grace? This is a home, not a crime scene. You must have mistaken old scabs or scratched skin." "Eleanor has been touching her head constantly. They were under her skin," Michael interrupted, his voice deep and controlled. "Not on it." Vanessa blinked, the first crack in her composure. "What?" Michael rose slowly to his feet, holding one of the pins between his fingers. "This was embedded under my mother's scalp. 4 of them. Grace removed them." Vanessa's eyes went cold for a fraction of a second, so brief that Eleanor might have doubted it, but Grace saw it clearly. Then Vanessa laughed again, softer this time. "Michael, darling, surely you don't believe this." She stepped close, touching his arm gently. "Your mother has been confused for weeks. You know that. She told me just yesterday she misplaced her glasses, but I found them exactly where she left them." Eleanor's voice wavered. "I wasn't confused. I was in pain." Vanessa sighed sympathetically, as though speaking to a child. "I know you were, Eleanor, but pain can create illusions." She turned back to Michael, lowering her voice. "This isn't real. Someone as inexperienced as Grace shouldn't be poking around your mother's head. She probably caused whatever bleeding she now claims to be evidence." The casual cruelty in her tone made Grace's stomach twist. Michael didn't flinch. "Grace did not cause this." Vanessa's smile froze. Very slowly, Michael placed the 4 pins into her hand. "These were inside my mother." Vanessa stared down at the metal pieces, her mask flickering, then tightening. She closed her fingers around them and forced a laugh. "Michael, please. These are tiny, meaningless. Probably from her old wigs or something the staff used without knowing. You're letting this girl manipulate. Watch your tone." Michael didn't raise his voice, but the authority in it cut through the air like a blade. Vanessa froze. She had never heard him speak like that to her. Grace felt Eleanor tremble with relief beside her. "Tell me," Michael continued, "why were you styling my mother's hair so often? Why were you behind her every day, insisting on touching her head even when she said she was in pain?" Vanessa's smile returned, but this time it trembled at the edges. "Because I care about her, of course. I wanted her to look presentable for our events. You know how your mother worries about appearances." "I never asked you to," Eleanor whispered, her voice breaking. Michael stepped closer to Vanessa, searching her face. "Did you ever push anything into her scalp?" Her facade cracked again, just barely. "Michael, how can you even ask me that?" Tears sprang instantly to her eyes, practiced and glistening. "You know me. You know how much I love this family. How could you let a stranger turn you against me?" Grace clenched her hands behind her back. She had expected resistance, but not this level of cold manipulation. Vanessa continued, voice trembling perfectly on cue. "She's trying to ruin us, don't you see?" She gestured toward Grace. "She wants to stay in this house. She wants to be important. She needed a story, so she—" "Stop," Michael snapped. Vanessa froze mid-sentence. Michael inhaled sharply, torn between the man he'd been, emotionally numb, distant, and the son now waking up to the truth he'd ignored for weeks. "I'm not blind," he said, "and I'm not stupid. My mother has been suffering, truly suffering. And you convinced me she was confused. You kept telling me her pain was in her mind." "It is in her mind," Vanessa insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. "She's old, Michael. You can't blame me for trying to help. You put everything on my shoulders, your work, your home, your mother's care. I did everything for you. And somehow," Michael said coldly, "my mother got worse the more time she spent with you." Vanessa stepped closer, reaching for him. "Michael, listen to me." He moved his arm away. It was the first time he had physically pulled away from her in the entire relationship. Fire flashed in Vanessa's eyes, fury so sharp it could cut. Grace stepped closer to Eleanor instinctively, positioning herself between the older woman and whatever storm might break next. Vanessa lowered her voice into a dangerous whisper. "If you choose to believe this girl, She gestured toward Grace with disdain. "If you choose her word over mine," Michael met her eyes with a clarity no one had seen in years. "I choose truth." The words hit Vanessa like a slap. Her expression froze. No tears, no softness, only pure, icy calculation. Then her lips curved into a slow, venomous smile. "Fine," she whispered. "If this is the version you want to believe, I hope you're prepared to deal with the consequences." She turned toward the elevator, each step sharp and controlled. At the elevator doors, she paused and looked back, first at Grace, then at Eleanor, and finally at Michael. "I'll be back," she said quietly. The elevator doors closed with a metallic hush. The moment she disappeared, Eleanor sagged into her chair, trembling. Michael turned to Grace, his expression full of gratitude, guilt, confusion, and a fierce protectiveness slowly waking inside him. "Grace," he said quietly. "Thank you." Grace lowered her gaze. "I did what anyone with a heart would do." Eleanor reached out and took Grace's hand. "Not anyone, dear." Her eyes filled with warmth. "Only someone good." Grace's eyes stung, but she held her emotions steady. Michael exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. "We need to get my mother checked. Properly. By someone I trust." "We can do that," Grace said. "But first," Michael looked at both women, something determined settling into his posture. "I need to know exactly what happened. Every detail." Grace nodded. "I'll tell you everything," but Eleanor placed a trembling hand over her heart. "Michael, before anything else, may I ask something?" Michael knelt beside her again. "Of course. Hold me." His eyes softened with a guilt so deep it hurt to look at. He wrapped his arms around his mother, pulling her gently into his chest. For the first time in months, maybe years, he held her not as a responsibility, not as a task, not as a duty, but as a son. Eleanor broke down in sobs. "I thought I was losing myself." Michael pressed his forehead against hers. "You will never lose me again." Grace stepped away quietly, tears burning behind her eyes, giving them space. But as she moved toward the hallway, she paused. For just a second, she looked at the 4 metal pins still lying on the table, and she realized something chilling. These weren't random. They were placed precisely, strategically, which meant one thing. Vanessa hadn't been trying to hurt Eleanor by accident. She'd been trying to break her, one pin at a time. And Grace knew this was only the beginning. Michael didn't let go of his mother for a long time. Eleanor's tears soaked the shoulder of his dress shirt, and his own eyes burned with a grief he had locked away for years. Grief for his late wife, guilt for his neglect, fear for what had nearly happened under his own roof. Grace stood near the window, giving them privacy, but she stayed close enough to help if Eleanor wavered. Outside, the late afternoon sun was lowering behind the skyline, painting the penthouse in a warm glow that contrasted sharply with the turmoil inside its walls. When Eleanor's breathing finally steadied, Michael eased her gently back into her chair. His voice was quiet but resolute. "Mom, we're going to fix all of this. No more pain, no more doubting yourself, no more being dismissed." Eleanor nodded, blotting her eyes with trembling fingers. "I never wanted to worry you." Michael looked at her with a mix of pain and love. "You're my mother. I'm supposed to worry about you." She gave a fragile smile. "Then worry a little more often." Grace lowered her gaze, heart stirring at the tenderness between them. But she also sensed something else, an awakening in Michael, a shift from emotional numbness to protective resolve. Something was changing in him, and fast. He turned toward Grace. "Please, tell me everything, every detail, from the moment you noticed something was wrong." Grace nodded. She spoke calmly, respectfully, walking him through the morning. Eleanor's wincing, Vanessa's overly attentive hair touching, the stifled cry she heard from the bedroom, the bumps under the skin, the metal glint beneath the scalp. She described how she removed each pin, one by one, and how Eleanor's pain eased after each one came out. Michael listened without interrupting, but tension carved itself into his posture. His hands clenched into fists several times. His jaw tightened until the muscle jumped beneath the skin. When Grace finished, silence followed. Eleanor reached for his hand. "Michael, please don't blame yourself." He swallowed hard. "How can I not? You told me you were hurting, and I believed what she said." His voice broke slightly. "I should have been here. I should have seen." Grace stepped closer, gentle but firm. "Mr. Davenport, guilt won't help her now. What matters is that you see her clearly today." Michael looked at her. Really looked. Something like gratitude flickered in his eyes. "You're right." Eleanor squeezed his hand again. "And she saved me. You should thank her properly." Michael nodded slowly, turning to Grace. "I will. More than I can put into words." Grace felt warmth rush to her cheeks, but she kept her composure. "I only did what was right." "You did more than that," Michael said softly. "You protected my mother when no one else did, including me." Before Grace could answer, the front door opened again, this time quietly. Both Michael and Grace stiffened, but it wasn't Vanessa. The butler appeared, slightly breathless. "Sir, I apologize. Miss Hart left in a hurry, but she stopped downstairs to speak with the building's doorman. Before I could intervene, I heard her telling him that Mrs. Davenport is suffering from delusions and that you may need emergency psychological support services brought up." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. Grace's stomach dropped. Michael's eyes darkened. "She told who?" "The doorman, sir, and the concierge," the butler said, guilt weighing heavy in his voice. "She was insisting that if she didn't return within the hour, they should contact medical responders. She said she feared your mother might harm herself." Eleanor gasped. "I would never—" Michael swore under his breath. A deep, restrained, furious sound. "She's trying to build a narrative. She's covering herself." Grace felt the cold truth settle over the room. Vanessa wasn't panicking. She was strategizing. Michael stood abruptly, every inch of his posture storm-like and controlled. "No one says a word to anyone else about this until I speak with legal counsel. Not the staff, not the building, not security." His voice sharpened. "Understood?" The butler nodded. "Yes, sir." Michael turned to Grace. "Is there any chance she saw you remove the pins?" Grace shook her head. "She came in after I finished. But she saw the evidence." Michael exhaled slowly, rubbing his forehead. "She'll say you planted them, or that my mother hurt herself." He turned to Eleanor, regret washing over him. "She's going to use your age against you." Eleanor looked down, devastated. "I knew she didn't like me, but I never imagined she would try to erase me." Grace placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "She won't succeed." Michael paced slowly, thinking, calculating. "I need proof, something undeniable." Grace spoke gently. "You have it. Physical evidence. And Mrs. Davenport's scalp? There are marks, bruising, small punctures." Michael nodded. "We'll get her examined by a trusted doctor, someone with integrity. A full report, pictures, documentation." His resolve hardened. "And then we'll take this to the police if necessary." Eleanor's breath trembled. "Police?" "Yes," Michael said firmly. "What she did was assault." Grace stepped closer. "But we have to be careful. Vanessa is already manipulating people downstairs. She'll twist every detail." "Not if I'm ahead of her," Michael said. "I'll handle the legal side, but I need you both to stay safe while we do this." Grace's heart flickered at the word "we." Michael looked at her with newfound trust. Something deeper, warmer, almost protective. "Grace, you're the only one who has seen everything from the beginning. I need you to stay close, to my mother, and to this situation." Grace nodded. "Of course." Eleanor smiled weakly. "I would very much like that." Just then, Michael's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and froze. A text from Vanessa. "If you think you can turn this on me, you're making a mistake. Meet me alone. Penthouse Terrace. Now." Michael showed the message to Grace and Eleanor. Grace felt her pulse jump. "You can't go alone." Michael slipped the phone into his pocket. "I won't. I'll go with you," Grace said immediately. Michael looked at her, surprised, but something in her gaze told him she wasn't afraid of Vanessa. She was afraid for him, and for Eleanor. After a moment, he nodded. "Stay behind me at all times." Grace and Michael walked toward the hallway leading to the terrace, tension thick in the air. Eleanor called out softly, "Be careful, both of you." Michael paused and glanced back. "We will." Grace turned off the lights behind them, leaving the living room bathed in the fading sunlight. Together, they stepped onto the private terrace, and there stood Vanessa. Perfect posture, perfect smile, a woman who looked like she'd been waiting to deliver a final blow. The terrace wind was gentle, too gentle for the storm brewing between the three of them. Vanessa stood at the railing, city lights glittering far below her like 1,000 unblinking witnesses. Her hair flowed perfectly despite the breeze. her red dress clinging like armor. She looked elegant, unshaken, but her eyes were sharp, calculating, almost predatory. She didn't turn when Michael stepped onto the terrace, didn't glance at Grace trailing 2 steps behind him. Instead, she stared out at the skyline as if preparing a speech. "Beautiful night," she finally said. Michael didn't answer. Grace's chest tightened. Vanessa wasn't rattled, not in the slightest. That meant she believed she still held power. Vanessa slowly turned, her smile graceful but lethal. "Michael," she greeted softly. "You came. You asked me to," he said coldly. "I told you to come alone." Her eyes flicked toward Grace. "It seems you've already chosen your side." Michael didn't flinch. "I don't need sides. I need truth." "Oh, truth," Vanessa laughed quietly. "How ironic." Grace stiffened. Vanessa walked toward Michael in slow, measured steps, her heels making soft taps across the stone floor. "Let me guess," she said. "The cleaning girl," she didn't even bother saying Grace's name, "showed you a little bowl of metal trinkets and spun a dramatic story about your mother being tortured." Grace's breath hitched, but she remained silent. Michael's jaw tightened. "There's nothing dramatic about metal pins embedded in my mother's scalp." "Embedded?" Vanessa repeated with a mocking lift of her brows. "Darling, think. She scratches constantly. She pulls at her hair. She's forgetful. She hallucinates. She does none of those things," Michael snapped. Vanessa's smile didn't break. If anything, it brightened. "You think because you saw her upset today that it means she's been fine? You haven't been here, Michael." "I have." Grace took a small step forward. Being present and paying attention are not the same thing. Vanessa's head turned, slowly, sharply, to Grace. "Careful." Michael placed a protective arm slightly in front of Grace. "If you speak to her like that again..." "Or what?" Vanessa whispered, amused. "You'll defend her honor." "How sweet." Grace forced herself to stay calm, even as her heart hammered. Vanessa turned back to Michael, her tone shifting from sweet to surgical. "Do you understand what you're doing? You're allowing a girl who's been here 5 minutes to turn you against someone who has stood by your side for 2 years. You stood beside me," Michael said, "but not by my mother." Vanessa's smile flickered. "I tried to help her." "You hurt her." A shadow crossed Vanessa's expression, quick, but unmistakable. "You're stressed," she soothed. "You're grieving again, you're projecting." "Do not twist this into my grief," Michael said darkly. "This is not about my late wife. This is about my mother, and what you've done to her." Vanessa exhaled dramatically, as if deeply burdened. "Fine. You want to accuse me? Accuse me properly. Tell me exactly how you think I somehow managed to force metal rods into your mother's head without anyone noticing." Grace spoke softly. "They weren't rods. They were hairpins." Vanessa's gaze snapped to her. "I wasn't talking to you." Michael's voice cut in. "Talk to both of us." Vanessa's lips thinned, but she continued. "Michael, sweetheart, your mother is aging. She's fragile, and this girl saw an opportunity, a way to become important in your home. Women like her always do." Grace steadied her voice. "I didn't want importance. I wanted her to stop hurting." "So noble," Vanessa scoffed. "You see how she speaks? Staged empathy. Classic manipulation." Michael shook his head slowly. "You can lie all you want, but the physical evidence is undeniable." Vanessa stepped closer, so close she was nearly chest to chest with him. "And what if I tell you those pins were in one of her old wigs? Or that they were part of an old hairpiece and your dear little maid here dug them out to stage a scene?" Grace inhaled sharply. "I would never—" "Oh, I know," Vanessa interrupted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're a saint. You saved his mother. He owes you his gratitude." Her eyes narrowed. "Maybe more." Grace felt the jab like a slap. Heat crept into her cheeks, but not from shame, from anger. Michael's voice dropped to a cold, controlled whisper. "Stop." Vanessa scanned his face, searching for any hint of doubt. "Michael, you have to choose wisely here. Everyone will believe me. The doorman, the concierge, the charity board, your business partners. I've already told them your mother is declining mentally. They expect a medical team to confirm at any moment." Grace stiffened. She really had prepared everything. Eleanor's voice echoed in Michael's memory. "She will twist this." And she already had. Michael stepped back, disgust tightening his features. "You went behind my back and painted my mother as unstable." "I did what was necessary," Vanessa said flatly. No, Michael said. You did what was convenient. Vanessa's jaw clenched, her working smile fraying. Michael, don't throw your life away on this. This? Michael repeated. You mean the truth? No, Vanessa snapped. On her. She pointed directly at Grace. Grace went still. Michael's eyes darkened. Grace did nothing but protect my mother. Oh, please, Vanessa hissed. You think she cares about your mother? She cares about you, about your money, about your name. She sees a lonely widower and knows you're vulnerable. Grace flinched as if struck, but she didn't look away. Michael moved half a step in front of her, instinctively shielding her. You don't know anything about her. Vanessa laughed. I know exactly what girls like her do. They worm their way in with kindness. They play humble. They pretend to care. She didn't pretend, Michael said, voice trembling with restrained rage. You did. Vanessa's eyes burned. If you choose her over me, I swear, I choose my mother. Michael cut in fiercely. And anyone who hurts her has no place in my life. For the first time since stepping onto the terrace, Vanessa's mask cracked fully, her eyes sharpened, glittering with a kind of cold desperation. Michael, she whispered, don't do this. It's already done. Silence. The wind brushed past them, carrying away the last remnants of Vanessa's false sweetness. Then, her expression hardened into something chilling. I warned you, she said softly, and I will not go down alone. A shiver ran through Grace's spine. Michael stepped forward. Is that a threat? Vanessa's smile was thin as a blade. It's a promise. She turned toward the terrace door, but as she reached for the handle, she paused, looked back, directly at Grace. You should have stayed in your place. Then she disappeared inside the penthouse. Grace exhaled shakily, her knees weak, but her resolve stronger. Michael turned to her immediately. Are you okay? Yes, she whispered. But she's not done. No, Michael agreed quietly. She's just getting started. He looked back through the glass doors, toward the house where his mother waited. Then he looked at Grace. Which means, he said, we have to be ready. And in that moment, between danger and determination, something unspoken passed between them. An alliance, a promise, a spark, but there was no time to name it, because inside the penthouse, a sudden crash echoed from Eleanor's room. Michael and Grace exchanged a horrified glance and ran. The crash wasn't small. It wasn't accidental. It was the kind of sound that made the heart drop before the body even moved. Michael and Grace sprinted down the hallway, footsteps echoing sharply against the marble. Grace reached the door first, her chest tight, her breath caught in her throat. Mom! Michael shouted, pushing past her. They burst into Eleanor's room. The lamp beside her bed was shattered on the floor. Pieces of glass glittered like ice around her slippers. Eleanor sat trembling on the edge of the mattress, her hands pressed over her ears, her eyes wide with terror, and standing just 3 feet away from her was a security guard, a guard neither Michael nor Grace had ever seen before. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a private security badge from the building downstairs. He held a small black medical kit in one hand and a tranquilizer injector in the other. Grace's blood ran cold. Michael's voice exploded. What are you doing in here? The guard didn't flinch. His expression remained terrifyingly calm. Sir, Miss Hart contacted building security. She reported that Mrs. Davenport was having a psychological crisis and required immediate sedation for her safety. Eleanor whimpered. No, please, get him away. Grace moved instantly, placing herself between the guard and Eleanor, shielding the older woman with her body. Michael stepped forward, fury radiating from him. Get out, now. The guard didn't move. Sir, Miss Hart instructed. I said get out, Michael thundered. This is my home, and you do not touch my mother. Something flickered in the guard's eyes. He didn't seem surprised, just irritated that his job had become more complicated. Grace's heart pounded. If Vanessa had convinced building staff that Eleanor was mentally unstable, then this was already escalating faster than any of them could control. The guard finally lifted both hands in a placating gesture and stepped back slowly. Very well. I'll report that she refused treatment. Michael pointed toward the hallway. Out, and don't come back unless I personally authorize it. The guard exited the room, slowly, deliberately, as if reminding them that he wasn't leaving because he feared them, but because he was choosing to obey. When he disappeared down the hall, Michael slammed the door shut and locked it. Eleanor broke down in sobs. Grace knelt beside her immediately. It's okay. He's gone. He's gone. Michael leaned against the door, breathing hard, his fists trembling with barely restrained rage. She sent someone to drug my mother, he said through clenched teeth. Drug her, like she's an animal. Eleanor shook her head, tears streaming. Why is she doing this to me? Why? Grace held her tightly, her own eyes stinging. Because you are the only thing standing between her and control. She thought she could isolate you. Michael pushed off the door, running a hand through his hair, pacing wildly. She's gotten into the building staff. She's spreading lies at lightning speed. If she convinces enough people that my mother is unstable, she'll try to get Eleanor declared unfit, Grace whispered. Michael froze. Grace continued softly. And if she does that, she gets power over the household, over decisions. Over you? Eleanor covered her mouth, horrified. She wants control over Michael. Grace nodded grimly. And removing you was the first step. Michael's fists clenched again. Over my dead body. Grace rose slowly from the floor. Michael, we've lost the element of privacy. Vanessa is acting fast because she's afraid. That means she'll make mistakes. But only if we stay ahead of her. He met Grace's gaze, his expression raw, heavy, shaken. You saved her once, he said quietly. And now I need your help again. Grace nodded. Tell me what you need. Before he could answer, the intercom buzzed loudly. Michael tensed. Grace's pulse jumped. Eleanor flinched. The butler's voice crackled through the small speaker. Sir, building security is here again. They say they need to conduct a wellness check on Mrs. Davenport, per Miss Hart's request. Michael's entire body went rigid. Tell them no. They do not enter this penthouse without a warrant. Yes, sir, the butler replied. But the hesitation in his voice revealed the truth. Even the staff wasn't sure whom to obey now. Grace looked at Michael. She's trying to create a paper trail. The more people she involves, the harder it will be to refute her later. Michael inhaled sharply. Then we need to document everything. Grace nodded. I'll take pictures of the marks on her scalp. And of the pins. She paused. Has your mother eaten, drank anything Vanessa might have given her? Eleanor shook her head. No, Vanessa hasn't served me anything in days. She has the chef bring meals. Grace sighed in relief. Good. Michael grabbed his phone. I'm calling Dr. Halverson. He's trusted, discreet, and he'll come here immediately for a medical evaluation. Grace's eyes brightened. That's perfect. Eleanor wiped her tears, looking between them with fragile hope. Thank you, both of you. Michael's expression softened. He sat on the bed beside her. I'm sorry, Mom. I should have seen what she was doing. Eleanor placed her hand on his cheek. You see now, that's all that matters. Just then, an alert popped up on Michael's phone. Grace saw his expression shift from anger to shock to fury. What is it? She asked. He handed her the phone. It was a social media post from Vanessa, a carefully crafted message with a photo of her and Eleanor at a charity event last month. The caption read, Please pray for Michael's mother. Her mental condition has deteriorated rapidly. We are doing everything we can to keep her safe. Protect your loved ones. Grace felt cold all over. She scrolled. Hundreds of comments were already pouring in. Stay strong. Sending prayers. I knew something was off with her. Poor thing, mental decline is so sad. Michael's jaw was locked in place. She's destroying my mother's reputation. Publicly. She's turning this into a mental health narrative. Grace looked at him, heart pounding. Michael, she's going to try to get legal guardianship over Eleanor. Eleanor gasped. No. Michael took his mother's hand. I won't let that happen. I swear. Grace looked toward the hallway, the path Vanessa had taken earlier. We need proof, she said softly. Hard proof, not just what I found. Michael nodded. Then let's find it. But then Eleanor's whisper froze them both. Michael, there's something I never told you. Michael kneeled beside her immediately. What is it, Mom? Eleanor's fingers trembled. Her eyes filled with shame. Vanessa, she kept telling me I was forgetting things, misplacing things, thinking things that never happened. Grace's heart sank. Gaslighting. Eleanor nodded slowly. She hid my medications, then told me I lost them. She moved my glasses. She said I made up the pain. Michael swallowed hard. Why didn't you tell me? Because you looked tired. Because she always said she was protecting you. And because I thought maybe she was right. Maybe I really was losing my mind. Grace took Eleanor's hand. You weren't. Michael looked at Grace, something fierce and protective in his eyes. "She made my mother doubt her own reality," he said in a low, deadly tone. "That ends tonight." Grace nodded. "So, how do we expose her?" Eleanor took a shaky breath. "There's more." Michael and Grace leaned in. Eleanor whispered. "She said, if I told you any of this, you'd send me away." Grace felt her breath stop. Michael closed his eyes in pain. "Mom, you should have told me," Eleanor cried softly. "I thought she loved you." Grace looked at Michael, her voice gentle but firm. "This isn't your fault. She preyed on your grief." Michael opened his eyes, full of determination. "Then I'll end this with truth." But before they could begin forming a plan, the penthouse intercom buzzed again. This time, a deeper voice spoke. "Mr. Davenport, we have a court-appointed wellness officer requesting entry to evaluate Mrs. Davenport's mental state." Court-appointed. Grace felt her heart stop. Michael's face went white. Eleanor grabbed Grace's arm, terrified. "What does that mean?" Grace whispered the horrifying truth. "It means Vanessa filed an emergency petition." Michael's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "She's trying to take custody of my mother." Grace took his arm. "Michael, and we need to act now." And as the buzzer echoed through the penthouse, Vanessa's real war began. The buzzer echoed through the penthouse like a warning siren. A court-appointed wellness officer at Michael's door, so quickly, could only mean one thing. Vanessa had filed the emergency petition before she even confronted him on the terrace. She had planned this entire sequence ahead of time. Grace felt the enormity of the trap closing around them. Eleanor clutched her hand, trembling violently. Michael stood frozen for only a fraction of a second before snapping into action with the clarity of a man who had been pushed past every limit. He marched to the intercom. "Who authorized this, officer?" A deep, formal voice replied. "The petition was submitted by Miss Vanessa Hart, citing signs of mental deterioration, memory loss, delusions, and potential danger to self. I'm here to complete a mandatory assessment." Grace could almost hear Vanessa's handwriting in those words. Michael's eyes darkened. "You have no authority to enter my home without my consent," the officer replied calmly. "Under emergency petition protocol, I am permitted to complete a wellness check if credible risk has been submitted." "Credible risk?" Michael spat. "My mother is safe. I am here with her." Grace glanced toward Eleanor, who was already shaking uncontrollably. The voice continued. "Sir, if entry is refused, it may be interpreted as obstruction. A secondary order could be issued, allowing security or law enforcement to escort your mother for evaluation." Grace covered her mouth. That was Vanessa's plan. Force him to comply, or escalate until Eleanor was forcibly removed. Eleanor whispered, "Michael, please, don't let them take me." Michael turned to her instantly, kneeling beside her again. "They won't. I promise." Grace leaned close. "Michael, we need time. We need evidence before anyone steps inside this home." Michael nodded sharply. "We stall." He pressed the intercom button again. "Officer, I need to see your credentials. Hold them up to the camera." "Of course." Michael switched to the camera feed. The man outside appeared legitimate. Badge, ID number, clipboard. Grace whispered, "He may be real, but the petition is built on lies." Michael's jaw clenched. "And I won't let those lies steal my mother." He pressed the button once more. "Wait there. I need a few minutes to prepare my mother for an external visitor." "Of course, sir," the officer replied without suspicion. Michael stepped back and turned to Grace and Eleanor. "We have 10 minutes, maybe less." Grace spoke quickly. "We need documentation of those scalp wounds. Photos. Date-stamped, in multiple angles." Michael grabbed his phone. "Grace, take them." Grace hesitated. "Are you sure?" He met her eyes. "You're the only one I trust to handle this properly." She nodded and moved behind Eleanor gently. "Mrs. Davenport, I'm going to take pictures. Very carefully. Is that all right?" Eleanor nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Do whatever you need, dear." Grace lifted the white hair delicately, revealing the tender, reddened marks, the small punctures where the pins had been pressed under the skin. She photographed everything with clinical precision, her hands steady despite her racing heart. Michael watched her with an expression he hadn't worn in years, quiet admiration, fierce trust, and something deeper he didn't yet know how to name. Grace stepped back. "Done. What else?" Michael exhaled. "I'll call my attorney, but he may not pick up fast enough." Eleanor whispered, "Michael, what if they take me?" Michael knelt again and took her hand. "Look at me." She did, and he spoke with absolute conviction. "No one will take you anywhere. Not tonight. Not ever." Grace's voice was soft but urgent. "We need to prove she's mentally coherent. Right now, before they step inside." Michael nodded. "A video." He lifted his phone and hit record. "Mother," he said gently, "I'm going to ask you a few questions. Just answer naturally." Eleanor wiped her cheeks, straightened herself, and nodded. Grace positioned herself behind Michael, watching, supporting silently. Michael began. "What is your full name?" "Eleanor Rose Davenport." "What is today's date?" She answered correctly. "What city are we in?" "New York City." Michael's eyes softened. "Who am I?" She smiled through tears. "My son, my Michael." Grace swallowed hard, emotions rising. "And how are you feeling right now?" Michael asked quietly. Eleanor hesitated only for a breath, scared. "But I know what's real. I know what happened to me. And I know who hurt me." Grace exchanged a glance with Michael. This testimony mattered. Michael stopped recording. Grace spoke quickly. "We need to hide the pins somewhere safe. Somewhere no one can claim we planted them at the last second." Michael nodded. "My safe." He grabbed the bowl gently, placed the pins into a sealed envelope, wrote the exact date and time on the front, then locked them inside. Grace watched him, admiring how fast his protective instincts were awakening. Then the intercom buzzed again, more insistently. Michael inhaled deeply. "Time's up." Grace took Eleanor's hands. "You have us. Remember that." Eleanor nodded, though fear trembled in her eyes. Michael opened the door to Eleanor's bedroom and stepped out. Grace followed closely. Together, they walked down the hall, each footstep heavier than the last. At the front door, Michael paused, grounding himself. Grace stood beside him, her presence steadying him more than she knew. He opened the door. The wellness officer stood there, clipboard ready, expression neutral, but posture firm. "Mr. Davenport," he said, "thank you for cooperating." He stepped inside. Grace instinctively stepped slightly in front of Eleanor's hallway, protecting without even thinking. Michael kept his voice even. "This evaluation will happen in my presence, and you are not to touch my mother in any way without explicit consent." "Understood," the officer replied. "Please bring me to her." Michael led the way. Grace walked beside Eleanor as they re-entered the bedroom. The officer approached slowly, professionally. "Mrs. Davenport," he said gently, "I'm here to make sure you're safe and well." Eleanor straightened, clearing her throat. "Thank you." Grace stood behind her, hand resting on her shoulder. Michael crossed his arms. A silent wall. The officer asked several routine questions. Name, age, location, recent events. Eleanor answered clearly, calmly. Grace could see the officer noting her coherence. Then his expression shifted slightly. "Mrs. Davenport, Miss Hart reported that you were experiencing delusions, specifically that someone was harming you. Can you tell me more about that?" Eleanor looked at Michael. He nodded encouragingly. "Tell him the truth, Mom." She turned to the officer. "I was in pain, not imagined, real pain. And today, Grace," she took Grace's hand, "found metal pins embedded under my skin." The officer stiffened. "Embedded?" Grace stepped forward. "Yes, I removed them myself. I took date-stamped photos." Michael added, "And the pins are secured in my private safe, and if you need to document them." For the first time, the officer's neutral expression shifted into concern. "May I see the photos?" Michael handed him the phone. The officer examined each image carefully, his brows furrowed. His tone changed. "These are significant. These are not scratches or self-inflicted punctures." "No," Grace said firmly. "They were placed." The officer swallowed. "Mrs. Davenport, did anyone have prolonged access to your hair or scalp in recent days?" Eleanor's voice trembled. "My son's fiancée, Vanessa Hart." The officer froze. He looked at Michael, then at Grace, then at Eleanor. "This," he said slowly, "changes everything." Michael exhaled, relief washing through him, but the officer raised a hand. "I still need to record my preliminary findings," he said. "And I need to speak privately with Mrs. Davenport." Grace's heart lurched. "Privately?" Michael's posture went cold. "No, she is staying with her family." "It's protocol," the officer insisted. Michael shook his head. "Safety is my protocol." Grace stepped closer. "With all due respect, Vanessa may try to manipulate this evaluation." We cannot allow any window for misinformation. The officer hesitated, then sighed. All right, she may stay with one person. He looked at Grace. Her. Michael blinked, surprised. Grace's heart fluttered with unexpected emotion, but she quickly regained control. Of course, she said softly. I'm here, Mrs. Davenport. Michael added, and I'm right outside the door. The officer stepped aside. Then let's begin. Grace stood beside Eleanor as the door closed gently behind them, and the evaluation began. But as the officer asked his first private question, a shadow passed under the bedroom door. Grace's eyes narrowed. Someone else was in the penthouse. She knew exactly who. Vanessa had come back. Grace's heart went still. That shadow under the door, it moved too quietly, too deliberately. Not the butler, not a staff member, not building security. There was only one person who crept like a predator inside a home she no longer belonged to. Vanessa. Grace didn't react out loud. She kept her expression calm, reassuring Eleanor with a gentle touch on her shoulder as the wellness officer continued his questions. Mrs. Davenport, he said gently, do you feel safe in this home? Yes, Eleanor answered firmly, her voice steadier now with Grace beside her. I feel safe with my son. I feel safe with Grace. Grace bit back the wave of emotion those words stirred. And before today, the officer continued, were there moments when you felt unsafe? Eleanor inhaled shakily. Yes, when Vanessa touched my hair, when she dismissed my pain, when she told others I was confused. The officer took notes. Meanwhile, Grace shifted just enough to keep one eye on the bottom of the door. The shadow moved again, slow, intentional. She whispered to Eleanor almost inaudibly, you're doing perfectly. Keep answering. I'm right here. Eleanor nodded. The officer continued. Have you ever harmed yourself? Or attempted to? No, Eleanor said, her voice strong. Never. The shadow paused, then disappeared. Grace stiffened. Vanessa wasn't walking away. No, she was positioning herself somewhere else, somewhere more dangerous. Michael's silhouette passed the door as he paced outside, unaware of the silent threat lurking inside his own home. The officer flipped his clipboard. Mrs. Davenport, Miss Hart reported that you were confusing memories, forgetting objects, and claiming people were hurting you without evidence. Eleanor's tone sharpened. She lied. And you feel certain? Grace stepped in softly. She has been coherent all afternoon. I can attest to that. The officer nodded. Her answers so far reflect clarity. A spark of hope lit in Eleanor's eyes. But Grace's attention flicked sharply to another sound. A faint click down the hallway. Footsteps. Soft, female. Vanessa was waiting. She wasn't done. The officer continued. Mrs. Davenport, I need to ask, did Miss Hart ever touch your head forcibly? Eleanor tensed. Yes, many times. She said it was to fix my hair. But it hurt. Always in the same place. The officer's brows furrowed. Did you tell her to stop? Yes, Eleanor whispered. She told me I was imagining things, or being dramatic. Grace felt anger flash through her. White-hot, protective. She gently stroked Eleanor's arm, grounding her. The officer sighed and set his clipboard on the bed. Mrs. Davenport, based on what I'm hearing, I cannot support the claim that you're mentally deteriorating. In fact, the opposite seems to be true. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. Grace exhaled a shuddering breath. But, the officer continued, I still need to confirm your motor coordination and cognitive strength. Could you stand for me? Grace nodded encouragingly. I've got you. With Grace's support, Eleanor rose slowly. A bit weak, but steady enough. She walked a few steps, answered more questions, recited a short memory test flawlessly. The officer smiled. Mrs. Davenport, you're in better cognitive health than many people half your age. A small and relieved laugh escaped her. Grace hugged her gently. But then, something thudded outside in the hallway. Michael's voice, sharp. Vanessa, what are you doing here? Grace's blood ran cold. The wellness officer's eyes widened. Is that? Grace didn't wait. She rushed to the door, cracked it open. Michael stood a few feet away, blocking the hall like a human shield. Across from him, Vanessa, her hair wild from the wind, mascara smudged, fury burning openly across her face now that her mask had fallen. She held a tall glass in her hand, a glass Grace instantly recognized. It was Eleanor's. Grace's stomach dropped. Michael, Vanessa hissed. Your mother is delusional and dangerous. She poured chemicals into this glass. I found it. Michael's eyes narrowed. Chemicals? Yes. Vanessa lifted the glass as if holding a weapon. She's trying to harm herself or us. Grace saw the truth instantly. The liquid wasn't chemicals. It was soap. From the laundry room. A quick setup. Too sloppy. Vanessa! Grace said sharply, stepping fully into the hallway. Put that glass down. Vanessa's face twisted. Oh, look, the maid speaks. Michael stepped forward, anger trembling in his voice. Enough. No, Vanessa snapped. Not enough. Not until everyone sees the truth. She held the glass higher. Look, this is what she's capable of. You think 4 little hairpins matter? She's sick, Michael. Sick. Grace stepped closer, voice calm, but deadly. Mrs. Davenport didn't pour anything. That soap is still sitting in the laundry room sink. You grabbed it to stage a scene. Vanessa's jaw twitched. Caught. But she didn't drop her performance. She's manipulating all of you, Vanessa shrieked. She wants attention. She cannot accept that you're moving on, Michael. Grace felt the words like poison sprayed across the hallway. Michael stiffened. This is not about me. Oh, it's always about you, Vanessa spat. She's terrified that I'll replace her. So she hurt herself and blamed me. That was the moment the wellness officer stepped out from the bedroom, clipboard in hand. Miss Hart? He said sharply. Vanessa turned and froze. He held up his badge. I've been conducting an evaluation inside. She glared. Then you'll confirm what I've said. He shook his head. No. In fact, I found the opposite. Mrs. Davenport is stable, coherent, and displaying no signs of cognitive decline. Vanessa's expression fractured. Fully. Finally. She failed your evaluation, didn't she? Vanessa screamed. She passed everything, the officer replied calmly. And the allegations you've made appear unsupported. Michael's breath left him in a heavy exhale of relief, but Vanessa wasn't done. Oh, I see, she laughed mockingly. Of course, everyone teams up against me. People always have. Poor, innocent me, Grace said quietly. Your behavior is only proving the truth. Vanessa pointed the glass at Grace, shaking. You. This all started when you walked into this house. You think you can take my place? You're nothing. Grace didn't flinch. I'm someone who cares. Michael stepped forward, voice low but lethal. Vanessa, leave. No, she whispered. I'm not leaving. I'm not losing this. The officer added, Miss Hart, any further attempt to interfere with the well-being of this household could be considered harassment or obstruction of a court assessment. Vanessa froze. Her breathing became shallow, wild, erratic. Then, her voice dropped into a chilling whisper. You have no idea what you've started. She turned on her heel and stormed toward the elevator, the glass still in her hand. Michael let out a long breath. She's unhinged. Grace touched Eleanor's arm gently. She's gone. But the officer shook his head. No, she's escalating. And people like her don't disappear. They regroup. Grace's heart tightened with dread. Eleanor leaned into Grace. What do we do now? Michael approached them both, his presence protective, grounding, and fiercely determined. We protect this family, he said, and we finish what she started. Grace felt something settle into place in her chest, a purpose, a bond, a promise. But before she could speak, Michael turned to the officer. What happens next? The officer replied, I file my report. It clears your mother. But Michael, yes? You need to act quickly. Miss Hart's petition is still in motion. You have proof, but you need more if you want a restraining order. Grace looked up sharply. What more? The officer hesitated. Solid evidence she intended to harm Mrs. Davenport. Grace and Michael exchanged a glance. They already had the pins, the photos, Eleanor's testimony, but they needed something irrefutable, something that proved intent. Grace whispered, We need to find whatever Vanessa used to store those pins, or any tool she used, anything she left behind. Michael nodded slowly. Her room, Eleanor gasped. Her room? You think? Grace placed a gentle hand over Eleanor's. If she hid things, she hid them where she felt safe. Michael's voice hardened. We search it, now. And with the wellness officer present to witness, Michael led Grace toward the hallway, toward Vanessa's bedroom, toward the evidence that could end everything. The hallway leading to Vanessa's room felt colder than the rest of the penthouse, like her presence had drained the warmth from the air long before she physically walked out. Michael walked ahead, Shoulders tense, jaw tight, each step deliberate. Grace walked beside him, steady but alert, her heartbeat quick and sharp. The wellness officer followed a few paces behind, document folder in hand, now functioning as an unexpected but invaluable witness. When they reached the door to Vanessa's room, Michael paused. For the first time since the chaos began, he hesitated. Grace saw it, the silent war inside him. This wasn't just a search. It was the moment he admitted, fully and painfully, that the woman he had allowed into his home had betrayed him in ways he never imagined. She touched his arm gently. "We'll get through this." Michael turned to her, his eyes softening for a moment. "Grace, thank you." His voice cracked, just slightly, just enough. Then the softness turned to resolve. He opened the door. Inside Vanessa's room, the space was immaculate, polished, organized with surgical precision. A curated life, perfect makeup scattered across a gold tray, designer clothing arranged by color, expensive perfume bottles lined like trophies. But underneath the beauty lay something unsettling. There was no warmth, no personality, no softness, just calculated elegance. Grace stepped inside cautiously. "She hides everything in plain sight," she murmured. "Look for things that don't belong, items that feel too ordinary or too hidden." Michael nodded. "Start anywhere." The wellness officer lingered near the door. "I will observe but not touch, for legal reasons." Michael began opening drawers. Slow, controlled, methodical. Grace checked shelves, scanning for small containers or items mismatched with the room's aesthetic. Eleanor slowly approached the doorway, leaning on the frame for support. "Be careful," she whispered. Michael glanced back. "Mom, you don't need to be here." "Yes, I do," she replied, her voice steady. Grace gave her a reassuring nod. The first clue. It didn't take long. Grace noticed something on Vanessa's vanity, something small, easily overlooked. A tiny silver case, plain, cheap, completely inconsistent with her luxury tastes. Grace picked it up carefully. "Michael, look at this." He crossed the room quickly. "That's not hers." "No," Grace agreed. "She wouldn't keep anything under $50 unless it had a purpose." Michael opened the case. Inside were hairpins, dozens of them, identical to the ones Grace pulled from Eleanor's scalp. Eleanor gasped behind them, hand flying to her mouth. Michael's jaw dropped. "This is it." Grace's breath caught. She kept them organized. The wellness officer stepped closer. "May I take a photo? This could be crucial evidence." Michael nodded. "Do it." The officer snapped detailed pictures. Grace looked deeper inside the case. One compartment was empty, but stained with something faintly pinkish. She swallowed. "Michael, that's dried blood." Eleanor's knees buckled slightly. Grace rushed to her side, helping her sit on the edge of the vanity bench. "We're okay," Grace whispered. "This is good. This proves everything." Michael stared at the case, trembling with anger and heartbreak. "She used these on my mother. Repeatedly." Grace touched his arm. "You didn't know. You couldn't have known." Michael shook his head, pain tight around his eyes. "I should have listened sooner." "No," Grace said softly but firmly. "You listened when it mattered." Their eyes held for a moment, something unspoken, tender, fiercely protective passing between them. But there was no time to dwell on it. The second clue. The wellness officer cleared his throat. "We should search the rest." Grace nodded and moved to Vanessa's bedside table. Inside the drawer, she found a vial. Small, dark, unlabeled. Michael stepped behind her. "What is that?" Grace held it to the light. The liquid inside was translucent, slightly yellow. "It's not perfume or medicine." The officer stepped forward carefully. "Don't open it, but let me document it." He photographed the vial from multiple angles. Grace murmured, "Something small enough to mix into lotion, shampoo, or hair products." Eleanor paled. "She often rubbed lotion into my scalp. She said my skin was dry." Michael's expression turned icy. She was drugging the area, numbing it so she could press the pins deeper. Grace nodded grimly. "This vial could prove intent." The officer spoke in a low tone. "This is enough for a protective order, possibly enough for criminal charges." Michael's hands shook as he slammed the drawer shut. "She's going to pay for this." Grace placed a steadying hand on his chest. "We'll do this right. Legally, safely." Michael looked at her, really looked, and some of the fury softened into gratitude. "She saved you," he whispered to his mother. And she's saving us now. Eleanor nodded, tears in her eyes. She's a blessing. Grace swallowed hard, overwhelmed by emotion and responsibility, the discovery that changed everything. Just when they thought they had enough, Grace opened the closet. Vanessa's dresses hung in perfect order, shoes arranged by height, but on the top shelf, just barely peeking out, a small, black velvet pouch. Grace took it down. It felt heavy, too heavy. "Michael," she whispered, "I think this is important." Michael stepped forward. "Open it." Grace loosened the drawstring. Inside were 2 more metal pins, a small surgical tool, needle thin, sharp, and a folded piece of paper. Grace unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. There were words on it, messy, rushed, half scribbled. She read them aloud. "If she keeps complaining, increase pressure, push slowly. She won't remember after." Eleanor let out a choked sob. Michael's face twisted in horror. "She planned this," Grace whispered. "This is the smoking gun." The wellness officer took the paper carefully. "This is indisputable evidence of intentional harm." Michael turned to Eleanor, devastated. "Mom, she was hurting you on purpose." Eleanor cried softly. "I trusted her." Grace held her close. "She can never hurt you again." Michael lifted the pouch and stared at its contents, his expression flooding with determination and protectiveness. "This ends tonight," he said quietly. Grace nodded. "We have everything we need." The wellness officer stepped closer. "With your permission, Mr. Davenport, I will personally deliver this evidence and file an immediate counter-petition and protective order against Miss Hart." Michael nodded. "Do it. Now." The officer left quickly, clutching the evidence. Grace helped Eleanor rise from the bench. Michael watched them, his mother and the woman who saved her, with an intensity filled with gratitude, guilt, and something warmer. "We're safe now," he whispered. But Grace shook her head softly. "No, now she's cornered. She's unpredictable. She won't stop quietly." Michael stepped closer. "Then I'll protect both of you." Grace looked up, breathing steady. "You won't do it alone." He held her gaze. For a moment, grief and fear melted, replaced by something new: trust, connection, a fragile tenderness beginning to grow. Michael whispered, "We get my mother checked, we file the order, and then we prepare for the fallout." Grace nodded, but deep inside she felt it. Vanessa wasn't gone. She was regrouping, and the storm she would unleash next would test them in ways none of them were ready for. The moment the wellness officer left with the evidence, the penthouse finally felt like it could breathe again. But that feeling was fragile, thin like paper, trembling like a candle flame in a draft. Grace guided Eleanor back to her room, helping her sit comfortably on the bed while Michael called Dr. Halverson, requesting an urgent house visit. His voice was sharper than usual, but steady, controlled, a man reclaiming his home. "It's done," Michael said as he hung up. "He'll be here in 30 minutes. Grace nodded. "That's good. We need medical records confirming the puncture wounds and recent harm. And after that," Michael added, "I'm filing a restraining order before Vanessa has time to twist anything else." Eleanor exhaled shakily. "I still can't believe I welcomed her. I wanted to see you rebuild your life." Michael took her hand gently. "You were too kind, too hopeful. That's not your fault." Grace sat on Eleanor's other side, and she targeted that kindness. "That's on her, not you." Eleanor squeezed Grace's hand, tears welling again. "Thank you, dear, for everything." Grace smiled softly. "You don't need to thank me." Michael looked at Grace with a depth in his eyes that made her heart flutter. Warm, protective, grateful. "We do." Grace lowered her gaze, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice. But the moment of tenderness was interrupted by a soft vibration from Michael's phone. He picked it up and went still. Grace noticed immediately. "What is it?" Michael turned the screen toward her and Eleanor. A message from an unknown number. "You can hide behind your maid and your mother's tears, but you won't ruin me. This isn't over, Michael." Eleanor gasped softly. Grace felt anger flash in her chest. "She's watching. She's still close." Michael's jaw tightened. "She's spiraling. And dangerous," Grace whispered. He nodded. "We stick together. Every step." Before they could discuss further, the doorbell chimed softly. It wasn't a buzz from downstairs, but the private doorbell inside the penthouse. Michael stiffened immediately. "That's not the doctor yet." Grace tensed, stepping closer to Eleanor. Michael walked to the video feed screen. A delivery man stood outside, plain brown uniform, a small box in his hands. A box addressed to Michael Davenport. Grace frowned. "You didn't order anything." "No," Michael murmured, narrowing his eyes. "I didn't." The delivery man shifted awkwardly. He didn't look threatening, but his nervousness set Grace on edge. Michael unlocked the door but kept the security chain on. "Yes, package for Mr. Davenport," the man said. "Came with express instructions." "From who?" Michael asked coldly. The man shrugged. "Didn't say, but they said it was urgent." Grace felt the air drop in temperature. A chill crawled up her spine. "Urgent. Anonymous. Delivered now." Michael took the package cautiously. "Thank you." The man nodded and left quickly, almost relieved to escape. Michael shut the door, locked it, and set the small box on the hallway table. Grace stepped closer. "Vanessa," she whispered. Eleanor stood behind her, trembling. "Michael, don't open it." Michael grabbed a letter opener from the drawer. "If it's from her, we need to know." Grace placed a hand on his arm. "Let's be careful." He swallowed, nodded, then cut the tape gently. Inside was a single item. Grace's breath caught. Eleanor gasped, and Michael's face went cold with rage. It was one of Eleanor's hairbrushes, the same one Vanessa had used repeatedly on her, but the handle had been split open, and inside the hollow interior, more metal pins, hidden, ready, prepared. Grace's stomach twisted. She was storing them inside her brush. Eleanor covered her mouth. "God," and taped to the inside of the box lid was a small note, written in Vanessa's elegant signature curls. "You should have trusted me. Now look what you made me do." Grace felt nausea rise. "Michael, she's escalating. Fast." Michael closed the box forcefully, trembling with fury. "This is harassment, threatening behavior, evidence of intent." He lifted the envelope with the note. "She just handed us everything we need to have her arrested," Eleanor whispered. "Why is she doing this? Why won't she stop?" Grace looked at her gently. "Because you survived her plan, and now she's losing control." Michael met Grace's eyes. "We need to get Mom to the clinic. Now, before Vanessa does something even more reckless." Grace nodded. "I'll get her coat." But just as she turned, glass shattered. A window in the living room. Grace and Michael both flinched, instincts firing. Michael rushed forward. "Stay with my mother." Grace guided Eleanor behind her, heart hammering as she peeked around the corner. The living room lights flickered from the draft. The window wasn't broken from the outside. It had been cracked from the inside, as if someone had struck it moments before. A small object lay on the floor beneath it. Michael bent to pick it up. Grace's stomach tightened when she saw it. A heavy gold locket. Elegant. Familiar. It was Vanessa's. Michael stared at it, horrified. "She was inside this apartment," Grace whispered. "Minutes ago." Eleanor let out a thin cry. She came back. The air shifted, fear intertwining with anger, grief, and protective resolve. Michael closed his fist around the locket. His voice was quiet but lethal. "She's not just unstable." He looked at Grace, eyes burning. "She's dangerous." Grace stepped closer, her voice steady. "Then we protect your mother. We stay together. No one leaves anyone's side." Michael nodded, breath trembling. Grace's heart pounded, not from fear but from the fierce, rising instinct to guard this family with everything she had. Eleanor whispered, "What do we do now?" Michael looked at both of them, his mother and the woman who saved her. "Now," he said, "we end this." And just as he said it, the intercom buzzed again. This time, Dr. Halverson's voice came through, steady and calm. "Michael, I'm here." Grace exhaled shakily. Eleanor leaned into her, and Michael whispered, "Good, because tonight, everything changes." Dr. Halverson entered the penthouse with the calm authority of someone who had seen every kind of crisis imaginable. He set his leather medical bag down gently and approached Eleanor with warm, steady eyes. "Mrs. Davenport," he said, placing a reassuring hand over hers. "I'm here now. You're safe." Eleanor's voice trembled. I'm glad you came." Grace stayed right beside her, offering silent support, while Michael stood at the foot of the bed, hands restless, jaw set, protective fury simmering just beneath the surface. Dr. Halverson examined the scalp wounds with professional precision. He didn't comment at first, just nodded, hummed, and adjusted the small flashlight in his hand. Finally, he looked up, and the gentleness in his eyes hardened. "This is not accidental," Eleanor swallowed, tears forming again. "I knew it." The doctor nodded. "These punctures are deliberate, consistent, and recent. Someone pressed sharp objects repeatedly at an angle meant to penetrate the skin." He removed his gloves. "I will document everything. Photos, written reports, timestamps." Grace felt relief wash through her. Clear, solid, professional validation. Michael exhaled shakily. "Thank you. We need this. Legally." Dr. Halverson straightened. "This is assault. There is no medical ambiguity." He looked Michael straight in the eyes. "If you want to pursue legal action, you have my full support." "Good," Michael said coldly. "Because we're filing a restraining order tonight." Grace nodded. "And with the note, the brush, the pins, the vials, and now the medical report, we have everything." Eleanor took Grace's hand, squeezing hard. "You saved me," she whispered. "You saved us." Grace knelt beside her, voice soft but steady. "No, we saved each other." Michael watched them, emotion pooling in his eyes, chest tightening with something deeper than gratitude. The police arrive. After the doctor finished documenting the injuries, Michael called the police. His voice was calm, powerful, no longer shaken, no longer uncertain. Within 15 minutes, 2 officers arrived at the penthouse. The wellness officer, who had returned to finalize his written evaluation, presented all the evidence alongside Michael. It was overwhelming. The metal pins, the surgical tool, the vial, the brush with the hollowed handle, the threatening note, the medical report, the wellness evaluation report, the statement from Grace, the statement from Eleanor. The officers exchanged looks. One finally said, "This is enough for immediate action. We'll issue a protective order and attempt to locate Miss Hart now." Grace felt Eleanor relax against her shoulder. "Thank God." Michael stepped behind them, wrapping an arm protectively around both women, instinctively, naturally, like a man who finally understood what mattered. A knock at the door. As the officers prepared to leave, a sudden knock echoed through the penthouse. A cold, stiff-knuckled knock. Every nerve in Grace's body tensed. Michael stepped forward, motioning the officers to stay back but alert. He opened the door only a sliver. Vanessa stood there, wind-blown, mascara streaked, hair wild. But her expression was brittle, trembling, frayed, like someone whose entire world had cracked beneath her feet. "Michael," she whispered, voice hoarse, "please, let me explain." The officers stepped beside Michael immediately. "Miss Hart, we need to speak with you." Vanessa's eyes widened. "You called the police?" Michael didn't blink. "You hurt my mother." Vanessa's voice shook. "No, I didn't. I was just manipulating her," Grace said quietly from behind him. Vanessa's gaze snapped to Grace. Hate, fear, and desperation colliding in her eyes. "You don't belong here," she hissed. "You ruined everything." "No," Michael said, stepping fully between them, shielding Grace behind his shoulder. "She saved my family." Vanessa's expression shattered. "You're choosing them over me." Michael's voice was steady, unbreakable. "I'm choosing what's right." The officers stepped forward. "Miss Hart, we need you to come with us for questioning. Please place your hands." "No!" Vanessa cried, backing away. "Michael, please, Michael, I love you. I did everything for you. Everything." Her voice cracked into wild sobs. But Michael didn't move. Grace didn't move. Eleanor didn't move. The officers gently but firmly took her by the arms. As they led her away, Vanessa screamed one last time, "Michael, you'll regret this. You'll regret trusting her. You'll—" The elevator doors closed. Her voice disappeared. And the penthouse finally exhaled. Aftermath. A quiet victory. Hours later, the penthouse was peaceful again. Dr. Halverson had finished treating Eleanor's wounds and scheduled follow-ups. The officers had left with statements and evidence. The wellness officer assured them that the petition Vanessa filed would be dismissed by morning. Eleanor was resting, finally free from pain. Grace tucked a blanket around her shoulders. "You can sleep. We're right here," Eleanor whispered. "I feel safe, for the first time in months." Grace touched her cheek gently. "Rest." As she stepped out of the room, closing the door softly behind her, she found Michael leaning against the hallway wall, watching her with a depth of emotion no words could fully hold. "You were incredible today," he said quietly. I owe you. More than I can ever repay. Grace shook her head. You don't owe me anything. I do, he insisted, stepping closer. You protected my mother when I couldn't see the truth. You stood in front of danger. You fought for us. Grace swallowed. I only did what anyone with a heart would do. Michael smiled. A real one, gentle and raw. No, you did what you would do, and that's rare. Her breath caught. He reached out, brushing a stray hair from her face. Slow, careful, respectful. Grace, he murmured. I don't know what comes next, but I know this. His voice softened. I don't want to face it without you. Grace's chest tightened with emotion. Relief, warmth, something tender growing like sunlight after a storm. She met his gaze. You're not alone anymore. Neither of you are. He exhaled, almost a laugh, a sound of a man letting go of old burdens. Stay, he whispered. Tonight, just stay close. For her, and for me. Grace nodded. Of course. He stepped back slightly, allowing their hands to slip together, naturally, gently, their fingers interlacing like it had been waiting to happen. Together, they walked toward Eleanor's room, keeping watch over her in the quiet glow of the penthouse night. The nightmare was ending. Healing was beginning. And in that fragile, tender space between danger and dawn, a family was rebuilt, and a new bond, warm, humble, unspoken, began to bloom.